For any who perhaps haven't seen my review for the first Raid movie, I alluded to the fact in that review that my favourite character, and also I would say the most badass character from that first film, was the character of Mad Dog, the older, smaller guy with the long hair who was easily the most skilled fighter in the film. But I couldn't mention fully why I liked him in that review because, of course, he's in this movie, and that would have spoiled it for the first film because you'd know he gets through it. But I, at the same time, don't like what they do with him in this film as much, because although you do get more of a look into his backstory, although the film is by no means about him, I feel that in this movie he's definitely underused, to put it lightly, if not full-on wasted. Now, The Raid 2 is a movie which definitely aims, and I would say succeeds, in trying to have a bigger, broader story than the first one did. It looks better, it's better shot, it has characters with more depth, more backstory, the story itself covers a longer period of time, and it's definitely more complex. This is no longer a movie about fighting your way to the top of a high-rise, it's about crime. And infiltrating crime from a police point of view, and of course the moral dilemmas that come along with that. And going back to my point about the more convoluted story that this movie has, I would say that that is both its strongest and weakest point, in a weird kind of way, because I think from a film-making point of view, and how good this is as a film, that makes it superior to the first one. Because there are higher stakes, more time, more character development, I would say it's a better film. It's a better told film, has a better story, more stakes to it, more character development. But at the same time, do you want that from your adrenaline shot of an action film? Because I would argue that for the pure, hardcore adrenaline shot that you would want from this kind of action film, the first movie gives you that more. It's a more pure action experience, whereas the second one tries to be more than that, and it is more than that, and I think that the ways that it is more are very good. It makes it a very different film, with of course the same kind of fighting, but there's nowhere near as much of the pace that the first film had. Plus the second movie is quite a long film. It's around, 2.5 hours long, so it's a decent sized movie, and it kind of reminded me of more like a Godfather level story compared to the just Judge Dredd feel of the first one. So if you're looking for more from your action film, then this one certainly delivers, and I think that's probably why I do enjoy this one more. But if you're looking for that pure adrenaline shot, just go for the first one. It really is that simple as far as I'm concerned. But without spoiling, of course, anything specific, the basic plot and the story of this second movie revolves around the same main character of Iko Ue, and he now has to infiltrate a crime organisation. Rather than just being part of a SWAT team going up a building, he's got to become the inside man, to in effect become the bad guy, and of course have all of the moral dilemmas and choices to make to both prove that he is a bad guy as far as they're concerned, while staying true to what he's trying to achieve. So of course, very cliched stuff on the surface of things, but the advantage that the film has is that it has the hardcore action mixed in there as well, and many of these other movies don't have that advantage. Now, as far as the scores go, I'm going to score it similarly to the first one, but actually I'm going to score this one higher, because of course, as I said, it's I would say superior film. It's not necessarily a superior experience, because they are two very different things. So, first of all, as far as the story goes, I am going to give it 1 point higher with a 7 out of 10, because what the story does, I think, is more interesting than the first one. It's definitely got more depth, more time is involved, there are more character stakes, you feel like you know the characters more because of the first film, but also because of the development of them in this one as well. As far as the characters themselves, I'm actually going to give it the same as the first one, a 6, which might seem strange given what I just said about having more development, but at the same time, what will work in one film could just as well work with less to go on in another. And what I mean by that is that the first film didn't have as much character depth, but it didn't need to. so it still did what it needed to do. So the fact that this one had more depth doesn't necessarily make it better for that, it just suits the story more. So I would say that the story is better, which is why I raised the score, but as far as the characters and whether or not they matched up to what was required, I think it was about the same. It did well, it was above average, but again, they're not going to win Oscars anytime soon, of course not. It's a great film, and it did what it needed to do, and it did it very well. As far as the visuals, the effects, well, I actually am bumping this one even higher than the first movie to a full 10 out of 10. The first one was a 9, and if you'll recall, I said that the reason why I gave it a 9 is because of the fact that the action, the choreography and all that is fantastic. Sometimes though it's a bit dimly lit, some things can't be fully seen, and just the colour palette, the way it's shot, sometimes were a little bit just okay rather than mind-blowing, whereas this movie definitely looks better, it's better shot, it's more vibrant, and also there are more locations. And although, as I've said before a number of times, I love movies that take place in one location, with an action movie you can justify very much changing the location from place to place throughout the film, and this one definitely has that. One minute you're in a prison, then you're out on the street, then you're in a casino, it changes around all over the place, whereas the first movie of course didn't do that. You were just in different apartments of the same building, and that worked for what it was trying to do. You still get the incredible action. It's not as non-stop as the first one, but it's pretty close to it. It's fantastic. The chases in certain vehicles at certain points, of course, are not done in the first film, so that adds another layer. For me, it's definitely a worthy 10 as far as the visuals and all that the visuals entail. As far as the soundtrack, the effects, the music, again, I'm going to actually rate it even higher with a 7, because the soundtrack is good, the audio quality is better, the fact that it's more polished, I think, suits this story more, because the grittiness of the first one works well for it. It has a grimy action feel, whereas this one is a slicker film, so it should look and sound slicker. It suits it, but at the same time, it's not glamorous. It's just what it should be. And finally, of course, for the rewatchability and entertainment factor, both on your own, rewatching it with a group potentially, well, you'd probably expect me to give it a higher score than the first one, given the fact that I said I liked the film more. But in actual fact, I'm giving it the same. I'm giving both movies a 7 out of 10, and the reason why is because of what I mentioned earlier. They are simultaneously so similar, but also so different. The first one is hyper streamlined, ultra violent, very simple, and gives you that shot of what you want. The second movie, on the other hand, has more character depth, the stakes feel higher, the story is more in-depth, takes a longer period of time to tell the story, both in the story and as a viewer, and yet I feel that those two things, because of the fact that they're the same essential story following this main character within the same universe, almost in a funny kind of way cancel each other out. The first one is great for what it does, the second one is great for what it does, and they're so different. And yet both of them, I think, are pretty much perfect at what they're trying to do. Now, the scores still aren't perfect because, of course, they're objective, but in an overall sense, I would say that both The Raid and The Raid 2 are, subjectively speaking, perfect action films. It's more the kind of argument of whether you prefer whichever of the Bourne movies, or if you prefer The Godfather 1 or 2. They're in the same universe, they tell a similar story, essentially just elongations of the same story in effect, but they're at the same time so different. Which one would you say is better? Well, could you really put it that way, or is it more so which one do you prefer? I think that's the case here. The first and second are very complementary, but very different, and I think that different people will prefer different ones. So overall, I'm giving it a 7 for that, and that means that the overall score for The Raid 2 is a 3.7, compared to, of course, a 3.4 for the first one. So, in other words, I think that both movies are very good, excellent action films, and that's coming from someone who's not the biggest of action fans. I find a lot of them too cheesy, not particularly funny when they're trying to be, and the action is usually an obvious stunt double with lots of explosions and not particularly that much violence. Then Bourne came along, at least for Western movies, and kind of changed that, and this movie plays on that, and it's nice to see that in the West we're getting more exposed to this kind of thing. And I appreciate that. because these are two great movies. So if you haven't seen them, of course do so. I mean, if you haven't seen them, you probably wouldn't have clicked on this second review first, but if by some chance you haven't seen the first movie, then of course check that one out as well. But that's it for this pick, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.